Welcome to the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we are a community of change leaders and prevention catalysts that strive to empower individuals and communities to promote safe, healthy, and drug-free communities across our region. We're honored to have you as a member of our PTTC community. Thanks for listening and keep up the great work.
Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
It's said an overnight success takes 16 years.
If we didn't plan for the change, but if we didn't help orchestrate it, then change is going to be upon us.
When it comes to the spiff, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Because the real power is in the process.
Ultimately, all of us want success in the work we're doing. We don't want to do mindless work. Proactive, participatory planning promotes positive, preventive progress.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast. I'm your host, Dave Clausen, and I am the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center. Our guest is Officer Ryan Snow. Ryan serves full-time as a police officer with a large university police department where he educates the community about DUI and drug-related issues. He is a certified drug recognition expert instructor and has completed hundreds of hours of training related to drugs and the impacts they have on the human body. As a police officer, Ryan has firsthand knowledge of the dangers that drugs bring to communities. He has spoken at numerous national and state conferences on topics related to drugs, and he has also developed training opportunities for campuses and delivered those classes at colleges and universities across the nation. Ryan's work has been featured in webinars, newspapers, television, and educational articles. And prior to law enforcement, Ryan graduated with a bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in educational administration. Now, before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the contents of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Without further ado, let's get into the content. I'd like to welcome Ryan Snow to the podcast. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
During my introduction, I mentioned that you are a drug recognition expert, or DRE. Would you mind sharing what all that entails?
Yeah, sure. Back in 2013, I put in a request to go to the drug recognition expert school or training. I was extremely lucky to be granted that opportunity. I went out to classroom training, a 2-week period of time, and then moved from that and did some evaluations on individuals that were actually under the influence of some type of drug. And the training basically trains you to be able to identify different signs and symptoms within somebody that's ingested a drug and be able to identify what type of drug that they've ingested or what category of drug they've ingested. So I may not be able to tell you that somebody has been doing cocaine, but I would be able to identify that they were under some type of a stimulant. And I kind of have come up with my own way of referring to the DRE school as kind of the PhD of training when it comes to impaired driving, because when officers are hired during the academy, they'll attend the 24-hour NHTSA training, so the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration training. It's a 24-hour program that we teach all officers in the academy to help them identify when somebody is too impaired to be driving. But most of that focuses on alcohol, and when they get out, they have the opportunity to take a class called A-Ride, which is the Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement class. And that's a 16-hour class, 2-day class, to give them a better idea of identifying people that are impaired based not only on alcohol, but also drugs as well. And so it's kind of a crash course for identifying when somebody may be under the influence of some type of a drug and how to kind of go about that process. I kind of refer to that. So the 24-hour class would be like your bachelor's degree of impaired driving. The A-Ride class would kind of be like your master's degree of impaired driving. And then the DRE school is basically the PhD, where we really break down all the different drugs, signs and symptoms, how they impact the body, and things like that, so we can give officers a really good idea of how to process if they come across somebody that's impaired by, a type of drug.
Wonderful. And really, on top of that PhD, you're also a DRE instructor. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so a couple years back, actually, I was approached by the DRE coordinator and asked if I wanted to take part in the instructor program, and I absolutely accepted that opportunity. And so now I'm one of the instructors that will actually teach the new DREs as they sign up to go through the course. I will travel to wherever the course is and teach some blocks or segments on the different drugs and how they impact the human body and what kind of changes you'll see and that type of thing. And I also will assist them as they go through their process where they have to do evaluations on individuals that are actually under the influence of some type of a drug, and I'll stand there and kind of help them through that process. These are their first kind of introduction to doing the evaluation on an actual person, and so I'm there to kind of coach them along to that process and come up with the correct decision based on what they're seeing.
A wealth of knowledge and experience. Can't wait to dive into our episodes and learn more about some of the current drug trends. Let's jump right in. DXM. I'm not sure if many of our listeners are familiar with this or not. I personally don't know a whole lot about it, so I'm glad we've got Ryan Snow here to talk about that. Let's start off. Ryan, what is DXM?
So DXM is actually a drug that all of our listeners right now are probably familiar with because they probably actually have it in their house currently right now. DXM is, the longer name of it is dextromethorphan, and that is a drug that's found in a lot of the over-the-counter cough and cold medications, including Robitussin and NyQuil and other drugs similar to that. And so DXM is one of those drugs that not a whole lot of people really know about. I guess they probably know that having too much of a specific medication is a bad idea. But dextromethorphan is actually the reason for that. And it fits into a drug category in the DRE world of dissociative anesthetic. And so basically what that is meaning is it's going to disassociate pain, and it's going to be an anesthetic for you. And so it's going to relieve some of that pain associated with that. So we have lots of issues with drugs like this. Just to kind of give you an idea, another drug that also fits into that same category is PCP. And so in law enforcement, we've seen lots of issues with drugs within this category to, basically cause us lots of issues because the people don't really feel a whole lot of pain and they have lots of strength usually. And so it's much harder to get somebody like under the influence of this type of a drug into custody safely and things like that. And so, but kind of going back to it, again, it's in lots of people's houses, usually in their medicine cabinet, and it's one of the drugs that we found the most are generally one of the first drugs of abuse that people start picking up on because at a younger age, we're talking maybe junior high, early high school, this is a drug that's readily available to that age group, they oftentimes will have it in their house, and they can take it and drink too much of it or take too many, capsules and start feeling the effects of the drug. And so, it's something that I like to bring up to people and talk to people about because, like you said, not a ton of people are super familiar with it, and they don't really understand, what some of the dangers are associated with it.
Yeah, so that's surprising. It's same class as PCP for DREs, and the young age range too. That's frightening. You shared a little bit about the effects of use, but I was hoping you could share a little bit more from the vantage point of a parent or somebody that's not a DRE. What could they look for?
So within the individual themselves, like the individual that has actually consumed too much of the drug, because let me kind of go back a little bit just to be totally honest. So people can consume. You can provide NyQuil or Robitussin to a sick child, and it's not like they're going to be walking around totally stoned out of their mind. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about an extreme amount of this stuff. So imagine buying a bottle of NyQuil or even 2 bottles of NyQuil and consuming them all at the same time. That's the type of level of ingestion I'm talking about. And so some of the other signs or symptoms that you may see or be familiar with somebody under this type of a drug would be like a blank stare. And so that's that 1,000-yard stare, like they're looking almost through you. That's something that can be brought on by this. If they're confused, disoriented, they might be having hallucinations. Sweating profusely is a very big one with this. So if uncontrollable sweating, we often see people that are, walking down the street or driving in their car. It may be February and they're sweating profusely. That's not a normal reaction to how cold it is outside. And so if we see things like that, I start going down my list of drugs that may, fit into that type of general indicator. And this is definitely one of them that does. And working, on a college campus, I see this quite often because this is also a drug that kind of carries forward too. And so we're not just talking junior high, high school, we're talking college aged as well, because, it's not illegal to purchase this. It's just illegal to use it to an extent to where you're going to be impaired by it and then potentially be driving a vehicle and things like that. We can still make an arrest based on DUI if they're impaired, even under this type of a drug. So again, perspiring or sweating, possibly violent behavior, that can kind of be an aspect of this. And that's again where we have to worry about it as law enforcement, because if someone's under the influence of this type of a drug and they become violent, but they also have the increased pain threshold, now we have to be worried about going hands-on with them. Will they respond to other tactics short of going hands-on? So we're talking taser or OC spray, pepper spray, that type of stuff. We have to look into those different things and how that might affect what we're seeing. But the pulse rate, blood pressure, body temperature, all that stuff is going to be up generally. So yeah, when we're talking DXM, after you've ingested it, the onset of the drug is about 15 to 30 minutes, but the effects can last up to 6 hours. And so, it can really throw people for a big loop when they see that, and you're ingesting something and it can be in your system and see impairment up to 6 hours after that.
That's good that you mentioned that 6-hour potential, because it really does come down to the safety as well. Just like you mentioned, driving vehicles. Those warning labels, we should read them and pay attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would be some evidence of use, or more specifically misuse, of the over-the-counter DXM cough medicines?
So whenever I talk to officers about this, being able to identify it, and it pretty much stays the same across to people that aren't officers too, is just kind of look for things that don't actually seem very natural. There's not a lot of people that, if I'm sick and say I need some capsules of Robitussin or something like that, if I go out, I'm going to buy one box of Robitussin. And, if I'm still sick at the end of that box, I might buy another box. But it's not common for me to go in and buy 3 boxes of Robitussin and have them all in my possession as I'm walking around. Okay. The same goes with like the NyQuil or anything like that. But one thing like I found super odd one day was I was on patrol and stopped a vehicle. And when I went up to speak to the driver, he had a bottle of Robitussin opened and some, partially gone in his center cup holder of his vehicle where you would normally keep a drink. And he was extremely impaired. He had been basically driving around and drinking the Robitussin, and after I actually made the arrest for DUI and we were searching his vehicle for additional evidence, we actually found another bottle that was completely emptied in his back seat, like underneath his driver's seat kind of thing, in his back seat area. And that led me to believe he probably had already consumed a full bottle and was working on his second as he was driving around. And so, things like that, that's not a normal thing. I don't typically walk up to a vehicle and see a bottle of Robitussin sitting in the cup holder. And so, if you start to see empty packages or empty bottles of these types of medications laying around in an individual's room, in their car, in their possession in general, this is something that you probably want to key in on and say, hey, that's not normal behavior. Typically these things are stored in medicine cabinets or at home or they're in the bag coming from the store that you purchased them at. And so I would say just kind of key in on that type of stuff.
All right. Great information. Another question. With the DXM, is this often something misused by itself, or is it one that's used in combination with other drugs or such as alcohol?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely one of those drugs that people will kind of tack on. In the DRE world, we talk about a polydrug user. So polydrug meaning that they're consuming multiple drugs from multiple categories. And so DXM would be one of those drugs that they might also attach to cannabis or alcohol or one of the other drugs that's widely abused in multiple categories. And so I've seen this alone. I've seen it attached to cannabis use as well. I've seen it attached to alcohol use. And basically the time that I had it with alcohol, the student that I came in contact with essentially said, well, we ran out of alcohol, and I know that if you drink a lot of this, it can make you high. And so I just decided to kind of get in with that. That was actually at the hospital after they kind of came off a little bit of the drug because we had to end up transporting them, because another idea that people don't take into effect really is when you take drugs that affect the body somewhat in the same way, then you have instances of what we know in the DRE world as the additive effect. And so if I can kind of put this in terms maybe the normal person would understand, is alcohol is a depressant, and something like a drug like Xanax or alprazolam is also a depressant. So if you take Xanax and then you also drink alcohol, because the two drugs are coming from the same drug category, they have an additive effect. And so it's kind of like 1 + 1 = 5, and so the effects that you're going to see in the human body increase dramatically when you have two drugs that affect the body in a similar fashion. And so when people are consuming drugs or poly-use drugs, a lot of times they don't think about how the first drug will affect the second drug and so on and so forth. And so I think that's important to kind of point out to people that, hey, if you are going to be using this substance or really any other substance with an additional drug, you have to be very careful about how that will impact you.
Yes, indeed. So there are some real dangers, from something that, when used as directed, can have very good benefits. When misused, there can be some serious dangers and implications. Definitely something we all need to keep in mind. What would be sort of one sort of final summary or takeaway for our audience in relation to DXM?
I would say DXM is one of those drugs where, people often will ask, not only with DXM, but other drugs too. People will often ask, well, who uses this? Who's the typical person that uses this? I know I talked about, it's junior high, high school, college age, but don't put off the idea that a drug user has no face. There is no typical user of this drug or really any other drug. We can't pick out drug users based on just looking at them and saying, hey, that person is a drug user and they use this drug. That's not how it works. And so, just remember that people use drugs for many different reasons. And I think it's important to focus on not the fact that the person is using the drug, but why they're using the drug. And this is definitely one of those drugs that I would put that at the forefront, because younger users are using this type of a drug because it's easier access and it's available to them. You have to start asking yourself, why is that individual using this drug? And how can we help them realize that using the drug is not going to help them in that specific circumstance, whatever they're dealing with? And then get them that help, be able to identify, hey, I believe that you're abusing this because I've seen signs and symptoms here, and I've seen the clues of use here. I don't want to know about the drug. I don't want to know how how often you use it or anything like that. I want to know why you're using it. That will get down to actually being able to help them.
Really could potentially be the turning point or the jumpstart to creating that change, diving into the root causes and addressing those. Very important. And it's always heartwarming, encouraging to hear such a person-centered approach to policing. I feel it really does make a big difference. So thank you for doing what you do, and with the heart and mindset that you apply to your day-to-day work. And also, thanks for sharing all this great information about DXM. Thank you again, and we'll definitely be having you back.
Yeah, thank you.